I want those who are watching us to, there you go. So again, welcome to Christ of the Hills, and welcome to our fall Pastor's Midweek Bible Study. We're glad that you're here. It's a lot different from the Bible studies we've done in the past, isn't it? We've never recorded these before, is one thing to put out, because I've always wanted to be very careless in what I said, and now I'm going to have to be very, very careful in what I say. But because of COVID, obviously, things are changed. We're not in the same place where we would normally be. Obviously, we don't have the numbers of 50 and 60 and 70 and sometimes even up to 90 that we had in these midweek studies. But we're here where we can space out, where we can follow all the protocols of wearing the mask and washing down. And I hope I saw no handshakes and hugs before as you came in. But we're glad that you are here. We want to welcome those who are joining us online. We have several, by the way, who are joining us from around the state who will be on a trip to Israel with us on April the 6th. I'll talk more about that. We have actually 4 churches going. I've pulled together several pastors who will be going with us. One of them is Scott Gallimore from nearby here at Piney Grove. We've got a couple of visitors here who are going on the trip from Piney Grove. One's John Miles, pastor of First United Methodist up in Jonesboro, Arkansas. They've got a great group going as well. And several wanted to be at this study, but of course Jonesboro is a long way to drive down here. So they're going to be joining us online. And then also Pastor Jeremy Pressgrove from Newport. So we've got several churches combined with our own. We've got about 50 that are signed up to go, and we're sure praying that everything will be great for us to head to Israel on the 6th of April. All right, so mask is off for me, but we're socially distanced, and I want to begin the study. Why don't we begin with a word of prayer? We thank you for the opportunity we have to come together, to study, to remember how important Jerusalem is in our own faith, how Jerusalem has been a part of our faith since we were children, hearing the stories of Jesus and throughout the Bible. And Lord, help us today as we study. Lead us by your Spirit, we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Put that on my ear. I took the mask off. I can now have the microphone. So, when I became a United Methodist pastor, I'm sorry I did that to you, Chauncey. Let's say thank you to Chauncey for leading our sound, and Kathy Brackey's doing our recording. We appreciate you guys so much. Yay! Thank you so much. When I became a United Methodist pastor, I had been in another denomination up until 1995, so that's 25 years ago. I began to write and offer midweek series of studies twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. This particular study, I really first wrote the first edition of this in 2016, so 4 years ago, when I was at St. James in Little Rock in preparation for our 2017 trip. I've gone to Israel at least every odd number year since 1997. So I wrote this originally in 2016. Of course, a lot's changed in that time. And then I wanted to present it this past spring, and this was COVID interrupted. We were right in the middle of the 5 sessions here when COVID shut everything down. And so we are starting again. I thought about starting where we left off, but no. So some of you will be hearing this for the second time as we start fresh, okay? So I gave you a handout here. And I know we have several that are going to be traveling with us who will be getting this by email. But you're here and you have it with you, and I'll be speaking directly to you. And you have all of the images that our folks online will be able to see in print to take home with you. So I'm calling this first study that Jerusalem is a city rooted, though often rotted in history. That's an interesting wordplay, isn't it? Rooted and rotted. Jerusalem, the city rooted, though often rotted in history. Now, though I've been back many times since, I've been privileged to lead some 600 pilgrims personally over 14 Holy Land journeys, and then as director of travel ministries for educational opportunities in Arkansas, several thousands of more by having their pastors go. I'm incredibly excited about my 15th journey. Some of you will be on that trip in April of next year. But I want to talk for a minute about my very first trip to Jerusalem and the first sunset that I ever experienced there. It was February of 1997, and I had just checked in with our group of 13 pilgrims from Pine Bluff, my First Methodist Church. Terry and I walked out of the front of the Seven Arches Hotel, which is on top of the Mount of Olives, and looked across the Kidron Valley. And it's a very surreal moment to watch the sun set over the old city, lighting up the Temple Mount with this golden hue, a spot that since 691 A.D. has been dominated by the Dome of the Rock. There's the image of it. See, that picture is actually taken from the front of the Seven Arches Hotel, right on top of the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley below, and then you see the east wall, the gates that are boarded up there, the Golden Gate, and then the Dome of the Rock there has been there since 691 A.D. And that's where nothing stood there after the destruction of Herod's temple in 70 A.D. by the Romans. So from 70 to 691, a period of 621 years, nothing stood there at Temple Mount. But that's one of the most photographed spots in all of the world, and sort of a second home to me. I can't wait to get back. But while I stood there at that spot and looked at the sunlight and the golden shading over the city, I began to sing softly the song that I had known for many years. And I take the title of that song as the title of the series of studies, Yerushalayim shel Zahav. Yerushalayim shel Zahav, v'shel nefeshet v'shel or. That means Jerusalem of gold and of bronze and of light. So, again, welcome to my COVID-interrupted 2020 pastor study, Jerusalem of Gold. Now, that phrase was popularized by a song written by Naomi Shimmer in 1967 to celebrate the fulfillment of a 2,000-year longing of the Jews to return to Jerusalem. It has since become the unofficial national anthem of Israel. So let's begin this first of the 4 sessions here. I think it's actually 5 sessions, by listening to the song as performed by the Israeli artist Yael Naim. Not yet, Kathy. Can you hold it just for a second? I want to do some introduction of that, with the beautiful background of the video scenes you're going to be able to see. Now, in a bit of movie trivia, Yerushalayim shel Zahav was played at the end of Schindler's List. As the Jews, many of you saw Schindler's List, I'm sure, and the Jews were released from the concentration camps. World War II is now over, and they're walking over the hill toward freedom. But the scene is totally anachronistic, since that song that they're singing wasn't written for another 20 years, until 1967, 20 years. So let's learn 2 Hebrew words first, so when Yael in her beautiful voice gets to those words, you'll be able to sing those words with her. In addition to Yerushalayim shel Zahav, of course, you already know those words. But those 2 words are ani kinor. Ani kinor. Say that with me. Ani kinor. Right. Ani is I in Hebrew. And kinor means harp or violin. Harp or violin. And it means I am a violin. I am the harp for all of your songs. It's the songwriter saying that she wanted to sing the praises of Jerusalem. And let me mention that word for a second before we look at the video. And I put this up here. The Sea of Galilee is known by 3 different names, and one of them is this name, which means harp, because it's in the shape of a harp. The first is obviously the Sea of Galilee. You know, the Galilee basically in Hebrew means something that's round. It doesn't refer to the lake. It refers to the entire region of the Galilee, which is basically a round shape in the northern part of Israel. Another name in the Bible used for the Sea of Galilee is Tiberias. It's used in John 6 and verse 1, that the Sea of Tiberias. Tiberias is the major city on the Sea of Galilee. And it was brand new. It was built brand new by Herod when Jesus was in his ministry. It was a brand new city. And that's where our groups stay. We'll spend our first 3 nights up here in Tiberias, and it was called the Sea of Tiberias. And then the third name, Luke prefers the name Gennesaret, and that G can be a K, Gennesaret, and that is this word Kinor, the Sea of the Harp, because the shape of the Sea of Galilee is that of a harp, wide at the top and then slendering down. So it is the shape of a harp, in the same way that we name lakes sometimes by their shapes, right? My dad was a farmer when he came back as a pilot in World War II before I was born at Round Lake down south of Pine Bluff. Pretty obvious what shape that lake had. And then you have some horseshoe lakes and things like that. So the lake of Gennesaret is based on this word kinor. I am the harp for all of your songs. By the way, the Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake in the world at some 800 feet below sea level, and is the second lowest lake in all the world. The other low lake that's even 1,000 feet below that is what? The Dead Sea, of course, and the Jordan River comes out of the Sea of Galilee and flows down to the lowest spot on the surface of the earth, which is the Dead Sea. And I've got a picture of having a glass of wine there at the lowest. So I'm going to turn this microphone off so we don't get some humming, and let's watch Yael as she sings Yerushalayim shel Zahav. I was fading in and out. Maybe we can do better on this one. Okay, a lot of beautiful Israeli children we'll see running around just like you see at the end of that. So I've chosen to anchor my first session with this verbal play on rooted and rotted with this particular anthem, since it combines a mournful remembrance of the Jews' history of Jerusalem with the sounds of joy in returning to the city. The lyrics that you just read and heard include the first line of Lamentations, "How lonely sits the city." My very first devotional, by the way, "How lonely sits the city that once was full of people." My very first devotional after we went into COVID lockdown, and no one knew it could possibly last as long as it did at that time, but through those first Sunday or two that the parking lot was empty and no one was here, and the first one that we put out online, I think, was based on this verse, "How lonely sits the city." This was Jeremiah's lament over the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. It happened in 586 BC, and the subsequent 70-year captivity. Jeremiah's lament over the destruction of Jerusalem includes the phrase, "How lonely sits the city, that the roads to Zion mourn," that no one goes to the festivals anymore. That's what I was talking about. We're in mourning because no one's coming to the coffee and cookie hour. No one's coming to the worship services and the Sunday school classes and so forth. The lyrics also include the phrase, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem," and that's a reference to one of the captivity psalms following the Babylonian destruction of Psalm 137. I thought I might go out and catch Kenny and tell him not to be blowing that during this study. I forgot all about doing it, so we'll have to put up with a leaf blower. "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem," is a reference to one of the captivity psalms in the Babylonian destruction. It's Psalm 137. "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps. There our captors ask us for songs, and our tormentors ask us for mirth, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion,' like you just heard. 'Be a harp for Jerusalem.' How could we sing the Lord's song in a strange land, in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy." So that song incorporates all of this biblical imagery from the Old Testament with respect to Jerusalem, being rooted in Israeli history, but also a city rotted through destruction several times in their history. 3 weeks after the song was published in 1967, the Six-Day War broke out. That was on June the 5th. And the song became a morale-boosting cry for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And Shimmer herself came to sing it for the troops, making them the first to hear it. On June the 7th, the IDF entered through the Lion's Gate, or the Sheep Gate. We'll go in through that gate every year that we're there. I love to take people through that gate because right next to it is St. Anne's Cathedral, a Crusader cathedral where we gather to sing. It's also near the pool where Jesus healed the man who was crippled for 38 years. So we'll go through that Lion's Gate, and they did that on June the 7th to take eastern Jerusalem from the Jordanians who had controlled the old city since 1948 and had expelled all Jews then 19 years earlier. And when Shimmer heard the paratroops singing Jerusalem of Gold at the Western Wall, it's only been written a couple of weeks, and yet they were singing it, she wrote a final verse countering the phrases of lamentation with a line about the shofar. You saw that. I called attention to the shofar sounding from Temple Mount. That she was referring to an event that actually happened, and here's the picture of it. Do we have the picture of it? In that song, in the lyrics, she's referring to this event when Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren is reading there. Shlomo is Solomon Goren, and he's at the Western Wall on June the 7th, and you see right beside a major blowing the shofar, the ram's horn of victory in coming back to Jerusalem. Beautiful picture. And these next pictures are beautiful as well. Oh, but I have another paragraph. I'll go and talk about this picture and then get back to that. The image on the left became a symbol of the Six-Day War for Israelis. And on the right, the image of the same three soldiers 49 years later. And that was taken 4 years ago on Yom Yerushalayim. I was actually in Jerusalem one year on Yom Yerushalayim, which means Jerusalem Day, when they're celebrating. There were tens of thousands of people. And we were at the Olive Tree Hotel that year. Some of you have been to the Olive Tree Hotel, just a bit from the Damascus Gate, a 5-minute walk from the Damascus Gate, which I pointed out there. And there were so many people, and there were fireworks, and there was celebration and music and singing. And so we actually we walked up to the Damascus Gate, and then we went up onto the wall. You can actually walk the top of the wall because there were so many people down below. We walked to the top of the wall around to see the Western Wall where the people were gathered with just tens of thousands of people. It was actually an incredible event. So you get these three soldiers on June the 7th, 1967, and then 4 years ago in 1996. Now, back up to the top of that page, the repeated phrase that I had to memorize, at least a part of it, to all your songs I am a violin, Ani Kenor, is a reference to a song that was written in the 11th century, actually in the 12th century, by an 11th century Spanish Jewish physician and poet named Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He was born in 1075 in Toledo, Spain, and died in 1141 at the gates of Jerusalem. He had come on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. But he was a very, very famous poet, physician, and philosopher. And he wrote, I cry out like the jackals when I think of their grief, the people expelled from Jerusalem. But dreaming of the end of their captivity, I am like a harp for your songs, Ani Kenor. And so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, I spent about a half of a semester in my graduate studies in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. Writer. So that's where this song comes from. Now, how shall I proceed to share with you a city whose history has left it often so rotted by utter destruction, yet a city rooted in history in a way no other city can claim? I want to begin with Psalm 48, which repeats the phrase, Ir Be'ir Eloheinu, which is the city of our God, in the city of our God. The Lord and greatly to be praised. Be'ir Eloheinu, in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of the whole earth. Zion in the far north, the city of the great King. Within its citadels, God has shown himself a sure defense. As we have heard, so we have seen. Be'ir Eloheinu, in the city of our God, which God establishes forever. Selah. Walk about Zion, go all around it, count its towers. We saw the Migdal David there, the Tower of David. Consider well its ramparts, go through its citadels, that you may tell the next generation that this is God, our God forever and forever. He will be our guide forever. Wonderful words of Psalm 48. It's a hymn of praise with a unique focus on God's protection of his city, and it has militaristic imagery, doesn't it, with citadels and walls and towers and ramparts. The city of Jerusalem, one wonders why in the world it would be such a center of the world's news in ancient times and all the way up until today's newspapers, but it certainly has been. And the militaristic imagery is no accident. And we'll be talking about that in weeks ahead, how the city is was naturally defended by valleys on 3 of the sides of the city, and only the northeast part of the city really needed a major fortress, a Roman fortress there, the Antonia fortress that King Herod built and where Jesus was tried. So while the psalm speaks clearly of the rootedness of Jerusalem in its history, tell the next generation that this is our God forever and ever, that doesn't tell the whole story, does it? It doesn't tell of the times that Jerusalem was rotting in the heaps of destruction. Most notably in 586 BC with the Babylonian destruction of the first temple. A little timeline here. David, of course, he conquered the city at about 1000 BC, about 1,000 years before Christ. He never built the temple, right? It was his son Solomon who built the temple up above the city. And so that was built at about 960, something like that, BC. So from 960 BC through 586 BC, almost 400 years, the first temple stood. Scholars speak of that as the first temple period of Israel's history. And under Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, the city fell in 586 BC and just rotted. And the elite were taken away into captivity. That's where we get Psalm 137 that we read a little bit ago, by the rivers of Babylon. Modern-day Iraq is where we sat down and we wept as we remembered Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, if I forget you, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. Let my right hand wither. So, that's the first temple period. And then they come back and they rebuild the temple under Ezra and Nehemiah after a 7-year build the temple, but not in all of the Solomonic glory. People wept when they saw that the temple wasn't quite up to the standards of the Solomonic glory. By Jesus' time, that temple had been reinforced, renovated, if you would, by King Herod, just right, who died just when Jesus was a child. As we all know the story, King Herod in Bethlehem and Jesus having to go to Egypt to flee from King Herod, who killed the babies of Bethlehem. And then when Joseph and Mary find out that Herod is dead, then Jesus is taken back to Nazareth to grow up. So we all know that story, but it was that King Herod who was such a great builder throughout the Holy Land. We still go to the places where he built amazing things like Caesarea on the Mediterranean, where he built one of the first Mediterranean ports, well, the greatest of all the Mediterranean ports in his time. And Masada is, of course, another of Herod's great building projects. And the temple, where the western wall now, the retainment wall for Temple Mount, where today even, sometimes it's called the Wailing Wall, where the Jews go, and Christians as well, and pray. And so, an amazing builder, but when Herod dies, then Jesus comes back. And in 70 AD, matter of fact, I talked about this in the Sunday morning sermon. If you were here Sunday morning, we had come in Matthew to the Olivet Discourse, and Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, where that first picture was taken of where I first sang this song, overlooking Jerusalem. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives, looking at Jerusalem, and he offers the Olivet Discourse and says, when these disciples come, these guys are from the Galilee, right? They're country hicks from the Galilee, and they look at all those buildings and say, wow, look at this amazing sight, just as we do today. And Jesus said, I'm telling you, there's coming a time when not one stone will be left upon another stone. This city will be destroyed. And he said, this generation will not pass away till all these things be fulfilled. And in 70 AD, the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans. And so we speak of that period from Ezra and Nehemiah to 70 AD as the Second Temple period. And then after the Second Temple is destroyed in 70 AD, nothing is on Temple Mount until 691 AD, when the current Dome of the Rock is finished. So a little bit of a timeline there of history. And by the way, both, and I've mentioned this in this paragraph, both destructions in Israeli history took place on Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av, the 9th of the month of Av. This year, that fell on the Jewish calendar on the evening of July the 29th and ended on the evening of July the 30th. And so this is a day of mourning usually in Israeli history. And They're remembering the destruction of both temples. This was also the day of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, and the day that the first Jews were shipped from Jerusalem, from the Warsaw Ghetto, to the Treblinka Extermination Center. So absent from this psalm celebrating Jerusalem's rootedness is this lamentation, like you have in the 89th Psalm, asking why. And here's the 89th Psalm. How long, O Lord? Will you hide yourself forever? How long will your wrath burn like fire? Lord, where is your steadfast love of old, which by your faithfulness you swore to David? These are called the lament psalms, the psalms of royal lament. This one in 137 that we just referred to. And it's this that caused Naomi Shimmer to write that beautiful song you heard, that after a 2,000-year yearning to come back to Jerusalem, the people had come back in 1948 and had become a nation. I'm sorry, that sound just keeps going on and off. Sorry if that's bothering you. But 1948, then, in May, the United Nations allows Israel to become a nation. So there you have the image from the Arch of Titus. There's the image from the Arch of Titus. If you've been to Rome, you've more than likely seen that. The famous menorah. The Jewish people led the plunder of Roman soldiers pulling the plunder away from Jerusalem. And then the next picture of the excavated stones at the base of the Western Wall at a street level. By the way, 100 years ago, all that was covered over with dirt. We have pictures from, when you're there, you'll see those pictures, but you can call them online. And you can see the ground level 100 years ago was up about 8 feet higher than where those stones are. And the excavations have come down, down, down to the bedrock. And that street that man is standing on, and several of you have stood on it with me and will be standing on it next year, that street is actually the first century street of Jesus. Jesus would have walked right on those stones. But what those stones are, they are left in situ, that is the way they were discovered in archeology, to remind us these were the stones that the Romans toppled off of the temple. And over time, in the city's rottedness, the grass grew, the ground, the dirt accumulated, and the ground level went up, as I say, 8 or 9 feet above those rocks. And now in excavations we've come down, and they're leaving those rocks in situ. He's standing there at a rock that's very, very important. It's actually been replaced. The original rock has been put in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and we'll see that original rock. And that is a rock that was right at the corner. Remember when Satan came to Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 during the temptation and said, you stand at the pinnacle of the temple and throw yourself off because God said his angels will protect you. And Jesus said, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Remember that passage? That is the pinnacle of the temple, the high point of the temple. And on one of those rocks that's now been removed, it's in the Israeli Museum, are the words, the place of the trumpeting. The place of the trumpeting, written in Hebrew. And it's been replaced there so people can see exactly where it was. But that's the only stone there that was removed to the Israel Museum. That's the place where the trumpeter, the shofar, would blow to call the people to the festivals that Jeremiah was lamenting. People don't come to Zion anymore for the festivals. And so it's right above him would have been the pinnacle of the temple spoken of in Matthew chapter 4. These next pictures we'll just run through real quick. These are artworks. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem here is a painting by Francesco Hayez, 19th century painting. And this shows the Romans destroying Jerusalem. You see the menorah in the lower left-hand corner being taken away. Grievous times, just terrorizing time. Remember Jesus said in that Olivet Discourse, I talked about this Sunday morning, he said to them, pray that when this happens, it happens not in winter, so that when you flee to the mountains to hide, it will not be in wintertime nor at Shabbat. That was interesting too. But when you flee in terror, pray that it's not in winter, so so your flight from Jerusalem won't encounter even more challenges than the Romans, in other words. Some suggest that that's just the Judean mountains, 20 miles away. Well, it really begins right when you get past Jerusalem, but 20 miles would take you all the way down to Jericho and the Dead Sea. It could be those. Some even suggest that he could be talking about the mountains on the other side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea in Jordan, where we go, and specifically the mountains around Petra. Interesting comment. Interesting theory. And then that bottom, this is the Jews led captive to Babylon. Jerusalem left behind burning by Nebuchadnezzar. This would have been 600 years earlier than the other one. So 600 years apart, on the 9th of Av, in a summertime destruction, late July destruction, the city is destroyed twice. So those previous images, of course, greatly conflict with the confidence of Psalm 48, where great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, his holy mountain. Beautiful in elevation is the joy of the whole earth. When I arrived in Ann Arbor in the summer of 1985 to begin my graduate studies in Hebrew, I couldn't wait to visit. One of my first things I wanted to do was go up to the 7th floor of the Harlan Hatcher Grad Library and see that famous 10th century Hebrew text of the Torah that was housed there in the rare books section, birds and all the rest. But I wanted to go see that, and now that I was officially in the program, they allowed me to do that. This was the second oldest of the Hebrew manuscripts at that time. And opening it, I wondered if my seminary Hebrew had been good enough to dive into the text without English headings. And because in Hebrew Bibles I have in my office, on the headings you'll have in English where you are. You don't have to scrounge around to find out where you are. But I'll long remember how my eyes fell on Exodus chapter 6 in Hebrew. God also spoke to Moses and said to him, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai. El Shaddai are the words you see there in the text and there. I appeared to them as El Shaddai, which means God Almighty. But by my name Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. So I was known as God Almighty, but I didn't tell them my name. El Shaddai is usually translated God Almighty, and the Septuagint translated it as Pantocrator, which means all-powerful, and the Latin Vulgate as Omnipotens, which is all-powerful. But the word Shaddai could derive from the Akkadian or the Babylonian Shadu, which meant mountain. El Shaddai then would be the God of the mountain. Jerusalem set in the mountains, you see, his city. God of the mountain. Any of you ever read The Source by James Michener? Twice, okay. I've read about half of it. It is an amazing book, and I always encourage people who are going to Israel with us to read at least the first part of it. It's absolutely incredible. But forgive a rather lengthy quote, but I love how James Michener in The Source accurately incorporates this word, El Shaddai, into his historical fiction. Zadok is his ancient Hebrew tribal leader in fiction, a word meaning righteousness, Zadok, and set in 1400 BC. And let's do a little quote here. He taught diligence in all things and reverence. His people were content to live within the protection of El Shaddai. He was a spiritual man whose tired eyes could see beyond the desert to those invisible summits of the imagination where cool air existed and where the one God, El Shaddai, lived. In later generations, people who spoke other languages would translate this old Semitic name, which actually means he of the mountain, as God Almighty. El Shaddai was destined to mature into that God whom much of the world would worship. But in these faithful days, when a little group of Hebrews camped waiting for the signal to march westward, El Shaddai was the God of no one but themselves. They were not even certain he had continued as the God of those other Hebrews who moved on to distant areas like Egypt. He was a difficult God to understand. He was incorporeal, yet he spoke. He was invisible, yet he could move as a pillar of fire. He was all-powerful, yet he tolerated the lesser gods of the Canaanites. He controlled the lives of men, yet he encouraged them to exercise their own judgment. He was benevolent, yet he could command the extinction of an entire town. As Zadok chipped away at his flint, he knew that the mountain in which El Shaddai was supposed to live did not exist in any ordinary sense of the word, for it would be offensive to imagine a God so powerful as limited to one specific place, with a tent, a couch, and a concubine. No sensible man would commit himself to a God so restricted. El Shaddai was a deity of such all-pervasive power that he must not be tied down to one mountain, unless that mountain were like the God himself, distant and everywhere, above and below, not seen, not touched, never dying and never living, a one God towering above all others who existed in a mountain of the imagination so vast that it encompassed the entire earth and the starry heavens beyond. Beautiful, beautiful text there. Mishnah's description that suggests two levels of reality to the one who is El Shaddai, the God of the mountain, is just like Jerusalem, his holy mountain, beautiful in elevation. And the New Testament writer of the book of Hebrews picks up on that when he says this, catching the parallel between Mount Sinai and Mount Zion. He writes in chapter 12 of Hebrews, "You have not come to something that can be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest, and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that another word be, not another word be spoken. So terrifying was the sight that Moses said, 'I tremble with fear.' But you have come to Mount Zion," that's Jerusalem, "and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant." So this Jerusalem that we know is a Jerusalem both on earth and in heaven. The heavenly Jerusalem in the book of Revelation comes down as a bride prepared for her husband. So come with me, some literally and some, all of us figuratively, to this Mount Zion, the city of the living God. Let us learn of it, touch and walk of it. How many millions of pilgrims through the years? None now, because Jerusalem, Israel just went into a second shutdown a week or so ago. It expects to last for another couple of weeks. But over the years, the millions and millions of pilgrims yearning to walk upon its stones, to press their prayers into the stones of the western wall, to kiss its stones even. But come with me to this Jerusalem. This, by the way, this image is Jerusalem in the time of King Solomon, because the temple is there on Temple Mount. That's where today you would see the Dome of the Rock. And the original city of David, the Ir David, where we go, by the way. Our group, I always, in the last 5 or 6 times I've gone to Israel, I always take our groups down into the original city of David, where excavations are ongoing, so that we can walk in Hezekiah's tunnel, 1,800 feet. How many of you walked in Hezekiah's tunnel with us? Okay, several. And the water will be various places. It could be on your knee or up to your hip even. But we walked through that tunnel that Hezekiah had his engineers dig from both sides through the rock, 1,800 feet, and meet in the middle in order to allow the people under siege by the Babylonians to access the Siloam pool, a source of water, while they were surrounded. Hezekiah's tunnel is very famous, and it goes right down that mountain, which was the original city of David, and you can see in the north part of it, the palace of David. So, and that's right where we enter and begin our walk down the tunnel. Fascinating place. So, as we finish up here in 10 minutes, as the mountains surround Yerushalayim, so Yahweh surrounds his people now and to forever. Hallelujah. And the intensely literal Johnson translation of that text from Psalm 125, Yerushalayim harim saviv lach, Jerusalem, the mountains surround her. V'Adonai saviv la'amo, and Yahweh surrounds his people. Me'ata v'ad olam, now and until forever. If Jerusalem is from ancient times the center of the world, today that is perhaps, spelling error there, truer than ever. The focus of the struggle between the Abrahamic religions and the strategic battlefields for clashing civilizations. The prominence of Jerusalem in today's dialogue of civilizations is abundantly clear, right? I mean, we're reading about Jerusalem all the time, whether that's moving the embassy to Jerusalem or the events of peace today between the United Arab Emirates and so forth. Consider this February 21, 2017 op-ed piece from the Wall Street Journal by Bret Stephens. He's now a New York Times writer. By the way, Bret Stephens, with whom I don't agree on a lot with, had a great editorial this morning in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, a great editorial talking about the encroachment of the unsayable, how it's people are fearful to say sometimes what they want to write or what they want to say due to repercussions because of their views. It's a great article. If you hadn't read it yet, get the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, Bret Stephens, The Encroachable of the Unsayable. But here's part of his editorial from February 21, 2017. 25 years ago, becoming a part of the West was the dream from Budapest to Ulaanbaatar. Not anymore. Russia took itself off the westernization track shortly after the turn of the century, that is 20 years ago. Turkey followed a few years later, as we all know. Ataturk would be absolutely spinning in his grave right now if he knew what was going on in Turkey. By the way, I was supposed to be flying back from Turkey yesterday. Educational Opportunities, the group that I do my Holy Land tours with, had their first international trip since they shut down completely in March, that left a week ago Sunday. And it was to Istanbul and to Turkey, which has now opened for tourists. And Tom Smith, who's one of my directors there in that part of my life, had invited me to go. It was just sort of a free of charge thing. Invited me to go with that first group. They had 40 or 50. I've been watching them on Facebook every day. Every day. They've had some beautiful, beautiful pictures. Even went up in a hot air balloon in Cappadocia. It was absolutely incredible. And they flew back yesterday after visiting Ephesus. And a wonderful 9-day trip, I think. But of course, they booked me 6 months ago when we were hoping this would all be gone. But I had to call them a few weeks ago and say, look, I appreciate the offer of the trip. And if I was retired, I'd go in a heartbeat. But I'm not. And so I'd have to get back and maybe quarantine for 2 weeks. And that would not be a good thing. So that's Turkey. There was a time when the West, I'm still quoting Bret Stephens, there was a time when the West knew what it was all about. It did so because it thought about itself. We in Western civilization thought about it. Those of our age, we studied Western Civ, right? We knew who we were. Often in freshman Western Civ classes, it understood that its moral foundations had been laid in Jerusalem, its philosophical foundations in Athens, its legal foundations in Rome. It treated with reverence concepts of reason and revelation, freedom and responsibility, whose contradictions it learned to harmonize and harness over time. It believed in the excellence of its music and its literature, and in the superiority of its political ideals. That's going by the wayside, isn't it? It's the superiority of its political ideals. It was not ashamed of its prosperity. If it was arrogant and sinful, as all civilizations are, it also had a tradition of remorse and doubt to temper its edges and broaden its horizons. And it believed all of this was worth defending in classrooms and newspapers and state houses and battlefields. We've since raised a generation to believe none of this, only to be shocked by the rise of anti-Western politics. It's a great article. It scares me sometimes. but it is a great article. Jerusalem rightly takes center stage in the conversation about Western civilization because it's the nexus of civilizations, as it always has been, right in the middle of the Syro-Palestinian corridor, straddling the junction of continents and flowering up like a blossom between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Let's see that picture, Kathy. I think that's the last one we have. You see here, Jerusalem is the circle in the middle of that blossomed flower. It's very difficult even to say where Jerusalem, what continent Jerusalem is on. It's in the nexus between the three continents of Europe to the east and north, Asia to the east and north, Europe to the west and north, and Africa to the south. And Jerusalem was in that, and all of that Syro-Palestinian corridor of Israel was right in that battleground between, as the power waned between the pharaohs of Africa and the Babylonian and Syrian kings, Israel would become a battlefield. And one of the most prominent of the battlefields was at the crossroads of the, right up the Syro-Palestinian corridor, the crossroads of the great road to the sea, the Via Maris. And that is at the city of Megiddo. Megiddo. And Har in Hebrew is mountain. So Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo, becomes Armageddon, the site of the final conflagration, the final battle, right there in that circle. So Jerusalem was really a westernizing force, as Brett Stevens pointed out. Not just in political and religious ways, but in linguistic ways as well. Our own alphabet comes from that. Let me just finish by mentioning that, and then that last paragraph, and we'll be done. Something, if you've been in my classes, you know I love to do with the linguistic part of this. Oops. In the linguistics, the alphabet was developed right there in that Syro-Palestinian area. And the Greek alphabet comes from the Hebrew Aleph Bet. Aleph Beth. And when it comes to Greek, it is alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, iota. And in the Hebrew, it's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, a different alphabet of 22 letters. But that was originally a pictograph, so that Aleph is a Hebrew word meaning ox or cow. And the original pictograph would have been something like that. You see the ox there? And then as that began to be stylized, because when you see that as a pictograph, all you ever thought of was ox. But the initial sound of that is ah, ah, ah. So when we move toward an alphabet where each sign could have multiple uses and could be used in innumerable ways with any word, they isolated that sound ah with the cow, and it was stylized. You still see the horns, right? And you still see the eyes. And then eventually it would turn itself over to our ah sound, where it's just, you can still see the horns of the cow. And then the Beth is Hebrew for house. Bethlehem, house of bread. Beth-El, house of God. Beth Shemesh, another city in Israel, house of the sun. So Beth means house. It was originally a pictograph that was basically a box that meant, this is my house. And when you saw that, you would say, this is my house, right? And then it turned to its side, and they opened a gate into the house, a doorway into the house. So now you've got a way to get into the house, and eventually then that became our B, because of the B sound in Beth. So from this area then, not only a westernization in the sense of politics and philosophy that began to emerge out of that flower toward the west, but you also, even in the day-to-day use of letters that you all use when you're on your iPhone or when you're on your iPad, comes from that circle as the westernization influence of the city of Jerusalem. So last paragraph here, well, not last paragraph, but the last paragraph on that page. Today, Jerusalem is the illuminated stage for the cameras of the world in an age of 24-hour news. Religious, political, and media interests feed on each other to make Jerusalem more intensely scrutinized today than ever before, as well as being more complex and confusing. I love this next sentence. Jerusalem has been the desire and the prize of empires, yet it is of no strategic value. It is a city of such delicacy that it is described in literature in the feminine, a sensual, living woman, but also as a shameless harlot. I especially, again, as earlier, think of Lamentations. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She who was great among the nations. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her, and they have become her enemies. She lives now among the nations, the diaspora, the Jews spread out among the nations, because Jerusalem is rotted and finds no resting place. Okay, there's the quotation from Lamentations 1 through 11. So we wrap up with these last few words. Behold how rotted is Jerusalem. Yes, but also rooted in history and in the imagination of the faithful. Jerusalem, listen to this next sentence. This is pretty incredible. If you take nothing away, this sort of capsulizes everything I've said. Jerusalem is the house of one God, the capital of two peoples, the temple of three religions, and the only city to exist twice, in heaven and on earth. Isn't that amazing? And I feel myself home whenever I'm there. On earth, the city has been swayed between rooted and rotted, while in heaven, the heavenly city, New Jerusalem, is one of celestial glory, where every tear is wiped away, and there is no need even of the sun to shine, for its glory is directly from its God. So thank you for joining me for Yerushalayim, Shel, Zahav. We continue next Wednesday. We go in a little bit different direction next Wednesday. We'll always be meeting at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. It's exactly 10 o'clock now. And we'll do this social distancing and keep everyone safe. Thank you for doing that. And obviously, if you can't be here, if you don't feel well next week or the week after that, stay home and watch it. Have others watch it. Appreciate you being here so much. One of the things that's different, by the way, is because of this, we usually go 1 hour and 15 minutes, and that allows for a lot of dialogue, but with the camera on, it's a little difficult to have some dialogue. So maybe Kathy will turn the camera off in a moment. And if you do want to stay and ask me anything that you may have thought of as we came through this, we'll invite you to do that.